Maliki stepped out into the arena, summoning his most powerful allies by his side. Protected by his energy, Pemblewink emerged from a smoky wall of magic as he started to feel fearful amidst the chaos, noticing some faces through the shimmering barrier that he knew all too well. It scared him deep down, understanding that most of these individuals he had once betrayed. The air moving around him like ghosts dancing in the wind. The silence was suffocating. The students and professors, frozen in disbelief, gazed upon Maliki with wide eyes, mouths agape. Some whispered his name in disbelief, while others dared not to breathe, fearing he may hear them. In his arms, Maliki carried the lifeless body of Cyber Embervert, once vibrant with smiles and jokes, now limp and motionless. The sight sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd, a collective gasp escaping their lips as realization dawned upon them. "Oh, what have you done, Maliki? Even I know that was a mistake." Pemblewink starts to back away from Maliki, trying to find a way out of the barrier he's created. Mrs. Perifold stood at the forefront, her eyes locked on Cyber's lifeless form, tears streaming down her cheeks like silent rivers of grief. The weight of loss hung heavy in the air, palpable and suffocating. For the professors who had known Cyber, their expressions mirrored Mrs. Perifold's sorrow, mixed with a deep-seated anger at the injustice of his untimely demise. Professor Veilstorm and Quasar made their way through the crowd of stunned students. Their hearts pounded in unison, each step heavier than the last. The sight of Cyber's lifeless body lying motionless in the arms of Maliki sent waves of anguish through their souls, threatening to shatter their resolve. "Oh, Cyber." Professor Veilstorm's voice cracked with emotion, her hands trembling as she held onto herself. She steps forward with her wand extended, only to be stopped by Quasar's firm grip on her arm. "No, Veil, you can't." Quasar's voice was barely a whisper, choked with sorrow as he struggled to hold back his own tears. But his efforts were futile, for the pain etched upon his face betrayed the depths of his despair. Quasar looks from her up towards Maliki and closes his eyes, breathing deeply as a display of moving images forms all around him, showing him the events that unfolded inside the dungeon. Professor Veilstorm turned to Quasar, her eyes pleading for solace amidst the overwhelming grief. "But he was like a father to me, Quasar. Please, we got to avenge him." Quasar's own heart ached at the anguish in her voice, his own grief mirrored in her tear-streaked face. "We can't act on vengeance. You know that is futile and stupid. We have to do this the correct way or be killed," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the din of sorrow that filled the air. Together, they stood in silent anguish, their souls intertwined in a web of sorrow and despair. And as they gazed upon Cyber's lifeless form, their hearts shattered into a million pieces, forever changed by the loss of one they held dear. But amidst the despair, Mrs. Perifold still pushed on and found a glimmer of courage, fueled by her grief. With trembling limbs and a heart heavy with sorrow, she took a step forward, her determination cutting through the thick atmosphere like a blade. Each step brought her closer to Maliki, closer to the truth behind Cyber's death. Maliki, aware of her approach, intensified the barrier around him, a powerful force field fueled by his own dark energy. But Mrs. Perifold, driven by her emotions, pressed on, her tears turning into a reservoir of strength. As she neared him, Maliki's power surged, sending waves of unfamiliar sensations coursing through her veins. The intensity of Maliki's power was overwhelming, unlike anything Mrs. Perifold had ever experienced. It was a symphony of emotions, a cacophony of pain and despair that threatened to consume her. Yet, with every step, she drew nearer, her resolve unwavering in the face of adversity. and as Mrs. Perifold closed the distance, her heart heavy with grief and determination, Malachi's facade began to crumble. The truth of his actions weighed heavily upon him, the guilt and remorse etched upon his face as he met her gaze. In that moment, amidst the chaos and despair, a flicker of hope ignited within Mrs. Perifold, a hope for justice, for closure, and for the light to triumph over the darkness that had consumed a friend she once held close to her heart. As Malachi's dark influence enveloped Mrs. Perifold, she felt a chill crawl down her spine, his words weaving a twisted web of deceit and manipulation around her mind. With each syllable, he sought to ensnare her, to bend her will to his own. But Mrs. Perifold, her resolve unyielding, summoned every ounce of strength within her, pushing back against the suffocating despair that threatened to consume her. With a flick of her wrist, she called upon her most potent magical abilities, channeling the very essence of her being into a dazzling display of light and energy. The barrier of despair that once seemed impenetrable now quivered under the force of Mrs. Perifold's magic, cracks forming with each surge of power she unleashed. But Malachi, sensing the threat to his dominance, countered with a wave of dark energy, his eyes ablaze with fire and malice. And then, in a sudden, unexpected twist, Malachi unleashed a devastating blow, a bolt of red power that shook the ground she walked on, catching Mrs. Perifold off guard. With a flick of his wrist, he shattered her focus, sending endless streams of pain coursing through her body. In the shadowy depths of ancient ruins, Malachi, the master of dark magics, kept control over Mrs. Perifold, a stalwart guardian of the light. Their clash echoed through the trees above the stone arches, each spell casting sparks of raw energy that illuminated the darkness. Malachi's voice boomed with malevolent power as he hurled more curses at Mrs. Perifold's body, his dark eyes ablaze with hatred. "You cannot stop me, Perifold. The darkness will consume everything." But Mrs. Perifold stood firm, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight as she countered with beams of pure light as radiant as the sun. "I will not let your darkness prevail, Malachi. The light will break through." Their battle raged on, the students and professors bearing witness to their struggle. Trees trembled as spells collided, sending shock waves rippling through the air. And then, in a moment of desperation, Malachi unleashed his most powerful curse, a vortex like a black hole where a shard of energy flew out, aimed directly at Mrs. Perifold, cutting her across the stomach. With a cry of defiance, Mrs. Perifold summoned every ounce of her strength. Blood pouring from the wounds, she started pushing back against the darkness with all her might. But as the vortex closed in around her, she knew she couldn't hold it back much longer. In a final act of sacrifice, Mrs. Perifold whispered a final prayer, channeling the last of her light into a blinding explosion that consumed her in hopes that it would consume him with her. The arena fell silent, the echoes of their battle fading into the night. In that moment of vulnerability, Mrs. Perifold's defenses betrayed her, the connection to the light dimming as darkness threatened to consume her essence. And as her energy waned, a gasp of horror escaped the lips of the watching students, their eyes widening in disbelief as they witnessed the unthinkable. Anne and Riley, their hearts pounding in their ears, watched in horror as Mrs. Perifold's once vibrant energy began to fade, wisps of her beautiful light dissipating into the surrounding darkness. Her ghostly eyes, once filled with kindness, now clouded over in a haunting mist with resignation as she gazed into the eyes of the twins one last time. And then, in a flash of blinding light, Mrs. Perifold's life force was extinguished, her essence torn asunder by the relentless onslaught of Malachi. As her form crumbled and imploded, turning inward, The students could only watch as the energy of her dying soul ignited. Riley's body jolted as the shock took hold of him, as his eyes became clogged from the tears. Yet determination drove Riley forward regardless, his heart racing under the weight of his reckless behavior. He raced forward with unwavering abandon towards Malachi, tears of hate and pain stinging his eyes. Seraphina, sensing the urgency, bounded herself forward towards Riley, bundling him up into her legs and throwing him onto her back. Anne shouted at the top of her lungs, her voice lost in a sea of students crying as collectively they stood completely shocked, her own tears staining her skin with sorrow as she ran across the arena sideways through the bodies. Ethan and Lily look at the sight of their friend with their hearts racing from fear and sadness, just the thought of losing him making their souls recoil. Each step towards Malachi that Seraphina took was like a dagger through their hearts. Meanwhile, Riley, clinging tight onto Seraphina, looked up as she clashed into and right through the force field that surrounded Malachi and his allies. Riley felt the need to put up his arm to cover his face as shards of the barrier rained down on him. However, the blades of light just vanish. Every ounce of his being pushed Seraphina forward, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him. Suddenly, Riley felt the strong body of Seraphina start to collapse. Uncertain of what was happening, he looks all around him and in the sea of faces that are watching his every move from beyond the barrier of billowing mist and chaos, he can see Anne's face screaming at him as Ethan is pointing down towards Seraphina. Riley can tell by his friends' frantic pleas that they are in turmoil. Finally, with bated breath, he manages to look down towards his loyal beast, his companion who saw him for who he truly was in his hardest time. A bolt of pain shot through his heart as he fell with a hard thud onto the cold stone floor of the arena. Rolling across the harsh ground that tore into his body where the jagged stones stuck out, he couldn't bring himself to look her way for fear of what he may see next. He's already lost so much to Malachi. Yet he could hear Seraphina's voice like an angel on the breeze speaking to him, telling him to look at her and to understand what had happened. His eyes, filled like pools of rippling water, trembling to his face and body, turns to look at her. She had morphed back into her human form, her radiance tarred and stained with oozing blood that poured from out of her stomach like a river of horror. Gasping for her final breath, he couldn't get to her fast enough. He was pulling himself across that stonework like his life depended on it. Riley lifts Seraphina up onto his lap, cradling her face with her hair drenched in sweat, her pale skin frozen to the touch and clammy from the writhing pain. He looks into her eyes that are unable to focus on him as he tries to soothe her, but he just doesn't know how. Riley heard an outbreath and sigh of release from her chapped lips, and in that moment he knew deep down she was gone, but he was still trying to make sense of it all. Who or what has done this to his guardian, to the one thing that was good and came from being in that world? Endless tears flowed as he couldn't hold them back any longer, and he held Seraphina in his arms, lifting her face to his before kissing her forehead and telling her to rest well before leaving her body behind him on the ground. Coming up behind him, he could hear someone approaching him. He couldn't believe anyone would dare. Turning around on his heels with his wand, extended his eyes, locked onto a familiar creature. In a cruel twist of fate, Pemblewink stood before him, revealing a blood-soaked dagger, wielding it like a toy with his usual swagger and carefree attitude. Pemblewink's smirk grew malevolent as he lunged towards Riley with the dagger, playfully thrusting the dagger back and forth like it's a fun game. Then, with a sickening clang, the dagger is thrown to Riley's feet as Seraphina's blood splatters up onto his face. In disgust and shock, Riley grabs for the dagger, powering it up using his own emotions as he weaves all of his anger and frustration from his heart chakra down his arms and into the hilt of the dagger and walks purposely towards Pemblewink. Riley stood in the dimly lit ruins, only cloaked by the moonlight, his heart heavy with grief over the loss of Seraphina. Tears streaked of rage fell down his face as he clutched himself softly, unable to comprehend the depth of his pain. Pemblewink, his movements disturbingly fluid. He smirked at Riley's despair, his eyes glinting with malice as he circled around him. "Ah, poor Riley," Pemblewink crooned, his voice dripping with mockery. "So distraught over your precious Seraphina. How touching." Riley's fists clenched at his sides, his sorrow turning to rage at Pemblewink's callous words. "She never deserved that, Pemblewink. Why couldn't you just leave her alone?" But Pemblewink only chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Riley's spine. "Oh, but Riley, my dear boy, I'm simply here to offer my condolences. After all, it's such a shame that she had to die by your own hand." Riley's breath caught in his throat, the memory of Seraphina's final moments flashing before his eyes. "I saw you do it." Pemblewink cut him off with a cruel laugh. "Oh, but it was you, Riley. You see, she had to die. She was the only creature you cared for, the only one you could truly call your own. And I couldn't have that. Now could I?" Riley's vision blurred with tears as he struggled to comprehend Pemblewink's twisted logic. "You killed her. Why? She never did anything to you." Pemblewink's grin widened, his movements becoming more erratic as he reveled in Riley's anguish. "Innocent? Oh, Riley, my dear boy, you still don't understand, do you? She was the only beast you could tame, and I couldn't let you have that power. So I took it away, just like your old life, your home, and of course, your beloved mother." Enraged, Riley lunged at Pemblewink, his fists flying in a blind fury. "You monster! How dare you!" But Pemblewink danced out of reach, his laughter echoing through the chamber as Riley's cries filled the air, a haunting symphony of grief and rage. Just before he could chase after him, Riley was forced backwards by an unseen hand that materialized through a vortex of black liquid like a moving mirror in the night. Shadowspear steps forward from out of the dark abyss and grabs hold of Riley, twisting his wrist in order for him to drop the dagger, and with words he will never forget, he spoke with so much intent and honesty that it gripped around Riley's heart. "Do you wish to end up the same as your friend? The darkness in that dagger is not your answer, Thatchet. You're better than that." Shadowspear removes the dagger from in front of Riley with a swift kick as it skims across the floor. While Shadowspear prevents Riley from succumbing to his own vengeance, he struggles relentlessly against the professor's grasp. Turning so he is in front of Riley, they lock eyes, a silent plea to let him go so he can rain down fury on Pemblewink, but that falls on deaf ears. Shadowspear's unwavering and protective gaze steadfast as he ushers him away from the scene of carnage. Throwing Riley with an unexpected force through the air, his back hits against the barrier which breaks the threshold and spits him outside of its protective bubble. Getting to his feet, he hammers on the barrier wall, staring down Shadowspear, as suddenly the professor fades into the darkness itself, beyond the confines of its embrace. As Anne, Ethan, Lily, and Nella rushed to Riley's side outside the fractured force field, concern etched on their faces, Riley's turmoil was palpable. He paced back and forth, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and grief, each step a silent testament to the weight of his burden. I should have been faster," Riley muttered, his voice choked with emotion. "It's my fault. Poor Seraphina, she trusted me. She put her faith in me. I let her down. Seraphina, I'm sorry." His words trailed off, lost amidst the ache of regret that gnawed at his soul. Anne reached out her hand and took it into her own. "It's not your fault, Riley. She went after you. It's not you who killed her," she insisted. her voice firm with conviction. It was her choice. She made her choice, Riley. Why did you all just stand there then, doing nothing? You could have done something, anything. Yet you just watched her and Mrs. Perifold die. Riley pleads with all of his fellow students with tears in his eyes. We are not bloody cowards. At least I had hoped we weren't. We were not taught to back away. How can you stand there and blame us? Come on, Riley. Look at your friends and at me. Can't you see we are all scared? Shocked even. How can we beat that monster? He's so powerful. Anne pleads for Riley to see sense in her words. Lily nodded in agreement and steps forward, her eyes reflecting the same determination as the boy she loves most. He's right. We looked on and let Riley go through all that alone. Are we that cowardly? Now it's time to fight, she said, her voice soft but resolute. If Riley can do it, so can we, no matter the consequences. If death comes for us, we will greet him with a smile. Ethan placed a comforting hand on Riley's shoulder, his expression filled with empathy. You're not alone, Riley, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. We're here for you. We got your back. Nella stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she met Riley's eyes. We've faced challenges like these before, she said, her voice calm but steadfast. And we've always come out stronger in the end. Get on your beasts, let's ride. Together. As they stood united, a chorus of voices rose around them, each cheering and shouting out in a battle cry. As the students prepared to mount their beasts, a sense of anticipation filled the air, mingling with the crackle of energy that surrounded them. Each creature stood tall and proud, their forms imbued with a power that seemed to pulse with life. Anne approached her Celestihawk with reverence, her heart swelling with awe at the sight of its majestic form. Its feathers shimmered with a golden hue, accented by streaks of pure white that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. With a gentle hand, Anne stroked its sleek feathers, feeling a sense of connection that transcended words. Ethan and Riley stood side by side, the mudblubs towering over them like guardians of the earth itself. With a rumble of anticipation, the creatures formed a shield around their riders, their thick, malleable bodies shifting and morphing into a formidable barrier. Yet, within their protective embrace lay a hidden strength, a weapon waiting to be unleashed upon their foes. Meanwhile, Lily and Nella exchanged a knowing glance as they approached their own beasts. Lily's bear surged with electricity, its fur crackling with energy as bolts of light danced along its form. With a playful growl, it nuzzled against Lily's side, a loyal companion ready to defend her at all costs. Beside her, Nella's wolf creature paced restlessly, its eyes alight with a fierce intelligence that belied its savage appearance. With a howl that echoed through the air like a clarion call, it sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it, a reminder of the untamed power that lay within its grasp. Together, the students mounted their beasts, their spirits alight with determination as they prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With each creature as their ally, they knew that they were unstoppable, a force to be reckoned with, united in purpose and bound by friendship as they stood together, united in a semicircle, ready to launch an attack. Yet as they waited for the opportune moment to strike, some of the students still speculated on Shadowspear's motives, while others debated the extent of his loyalty to Malachy. But amidst the cacophony of voices, one sentiment remained clear, the belief that Shadowspear's actions, however misguided, were driven by a desire to protect those he cared about. He's sacrificing himself for us, Professor Quasar murmured, his voice tinged with sadness. Because he couldn't save Malachy, his greatest failure. Bloomfield nodded in agreement, her expression solemn. He sees us as his second chance, she said, his voice tinged with regret. A chance to right the wrongs of his past, to protect us where he failed to protect Malachy. As the discussion unfolded, Riley felt a glimmer of hope flicker within him. Despite the darkness that threatened to engulf them, they stood united, bound by a common purpose and a shared determination to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. And as they faced the unknown together, Riley knew that they would emerge stronger than ever before, their bonds forged in the crucible of adversity. Shadowspear turned slowly towards Pemblewink, and in that moment, while his eyes are seething with a darkness that nobody has seen within him before. Stupidly, Pemblewink finds the courage to taunt him in a last attempt to defeat Shadowspear's mind before their fight has even begun. You know, for a professor of the ancient arts, you hold very little power compared to Malachi. It's a shame you didn't save his soul in the end. Could have avoided all of this death if you had just been able to counteract that curse. I guess you don't have it in you. Pemblewink starts to back up and away from Shadowspear as he walks towards him with strides that would strike fear into any foe. Oh, I have it in me. Now I will watch you burn. Just as Shadowspear utters those words, his hand shoots out at lightning speed just as Pemblewink runs on his little furry legs towards his dagger. Seizing the weapon right from under Pemblewink's nose, Shadowspear held the dagger in his right hand as his fingers gripped slowly around the hilt, fixating his gaze on Pemblewink's eyes as a fleeting little smirk crosses Shadowspear's lips. In the ethereal bubble of Malachi's magic, where ancient whispers spoke in riddles, the stage was set for a clash of mystical titans. Processor Shadowspear, a master of arcane arts with a visage shrouded in mystery, stood firm, his eyes ablaze with the fierce determination of a seasoned warrior. Opposite him, the enigmatic Pemblewink, a creature of feline grace and otherworldly charm, prepared to unleash his formidable powers in a battle that would shake the very foundations of reality itself. At first glance, Pemblewink appeared as he always had, a sleek and elegant creature with eyes that gleamed like orbs of liquid moonlight and fur as soft as the melody of a summer breeze. But as the magical energies surged around him, a transformation began to take hold. With a shimmering cascade of iridescent light, Pemblewink morphed into a towering behemoth, a magnificent beast standing proudly on two hind legs, his form adorned with a mane that billowed like flames in the night. Riley and Anne, who were once just mortals, thrust into a realm of wonders and horrors beyond their wildest imaginations, watched in awe and trepidation as the battlefield ignited with the clash of opposing forces. Shadowspear, his mastery of the arcane, honed through trials both perilous and dark, unleashed a torrent of spellcraft that defined the laws of gravity and sparked with malevolent intent. Each incantation danced upon the air like a deadly symphony, weaving a tapestry of magic that threatened to consume all in its path. But Pemblewink, undaunted by the onslaught, roared with a primal fury that echoed through the very fabric of existence. With each swipe of his clawed paws and each bellow of his thunderous roar, he unleashed waves of raw magical energy that shimmered and flowed like ribbons of purest light. His eyes, once gentle and serene, now blazed with an intensity that spoke of ancient power and boundless determination. As the battle raged on, Riley and Anne could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the taste of impending doom. They watched in horror as the forces of magic clashed and intertwined, a chaotic maelstrom of shadow against darkness that threatened to consume them whole. And yet, amidst the chaos and the danger, they could not tear their eyes away, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. In the end, it was impossible to say who emerged victorious in the clash, for the very fabric of reality seemed to blur and shift with each passing moment. But one thing was certain. In that moment, Amidst the whispers of the ancient voices and the echoes of forgotten realms, Riley and Anne had borne witness to a battle that would be remembered for ages to come. Ah, shit, Pemblewink utters under his breath, and with a gasp, he feels a surge of pain enter through and up his entire body, looking down towards the hole created with the dagger that lifted him off the ground. Shadowspear threw his limp and lifeless body through the blood-soaked air, and as his furry little face rolled effortlessly across the ground and in, Riley and Anne, who were once just mortals, thrust into a realm of wonders and horrors beyond their wildest imaginations, watched in awe and trepidation as the battlefield ignited with the clash of opposing forces. Shadowspear, his mastery of the arcane, honed through trials both perilous and dark, unleashed a torrent of spellcraft that defined the laws of gravity and sparked with malevolent intent. Each incantation danced upon the air like a deadly symphony, weaving a tapestry of magic that threatened to consume all in its path. But Pemblewink, undaunted by the onslaught, roared with a primal fury that echoed through the very fabric of existence. With each swipe of his clawed paws and each bellow of his thunderous roar, he unleashed waves of raw, magical energy that shimmered and flowed like ribbons of purest light. His eyes, once gentle and serene, now blazed with an intensity that spoke of ancient power and boundless determination. As the battle raged on, Riley and Anne could feel the ground tremble beneath their feet, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the taste of impending doom. They watched in horror as the forces of magic clashed and intertwined, a chaotic maelstrom of shadow against darkness that threatened to consume them whole. And yet, amidst the chaos and the danger, they could not tear their eyes away, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. In the end, it was impossible to say who emerged victorious in the clash, for the very fabric of reality seemed to blur and shift with each passing moment. But one thing was certain. In that moment, amidst the whispers of the ancient voices and the echoes of forgotten realms, Riley and Anne had borne witness to a battle that would be remembered for ages to come. Ah, shit, Pemblewink utters under his breath, and with a gasp, he feels a surge of pain enter through and up his entire body, looking down towards the hole created with the dagger that lifted him off the ground. Shadowspear threw his limp and lifeless body through the blood-soaked air, and as his furry little face rolled effortlessly across the ground and in front of Malachi's boots, there was a look that crossed his face, a pang of defeat that flickered in his eyes as the last life inside Pemblewink ceased. Pemblewink's eyes fluttered shut for a final time. As Shadowspear and Malachi stood locked in a battle of wills, the air around them grew heavy with the weight of their shared history. With a grim resolve, Malachi reached for the vials on his alchemist belt, each one containing a fragment of his darkest deeds. As the vials were uncorked, a chorus of anguished cries echoed through the arena, the tormented souls swirling around Shadowspear like a storm of shadows. With each passing moment, their presence grew stronger, until Shadowspear found himself engulfed in a maelstrom of pain and sorrow. Blinded by the swirling darkness, Shadowspear stumbled backwards, his senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of despair that surrounded him. The souls lashed out with tendrils of dark magic, their spectral forms twisting and contorting in their endless torment. Forced to the ground by the relentless onslaught, Shadowspear fought with a desperation born of survival. With a power he had not called upon in many years, he pushed back against the encroaching darkness, his very essence hanging in the balance. But as Malachi unleashed the full force of his curse, Shadowspear felt himself being consumed by the power. The relic around Malachi's neck pulsed with malevolent energy, its ancient power seeping into Shadowspear's very soul. With a primal scream of agony, Shadowspear felt his body thrusted backwards, the sea of tormented souls crashing over him like a tidal wave. As their myriad of faces washed across his own, he was overcome by a sense of overwhelming despair, each soul a reminder of his past failures and the darkness that had consumed him once upon a time. In that moment of anguish, Shadowspear knew that he stood on the precipice of oblivion, his very soul teetering on the edge of destruction. And as he screamed into the void, he realized that he was not just fighting for his life, but for the very essence of his being. And just as he thought it was easier to relent, a thundering sound filled the air around him as he mustered the energy to look towards the barrier. As Anne and Riley stood amidst the chaos, their hearts heavy with the weight of their friend's peril, they knew that they had to act. With a shared glance, they spurred their beasts forward, charging towards the magical barrier that Malachi had erected around himself. In the heart of a desolate arena, where the very air seemed to hum with the echoes of ancient incantations, Malachi, the malevolent necromancer, stood shrouded in a cloak of swirling darkness. Around him, the souls of the fallen twisted and writhed in silent agony, their ethereal forms bound by the chains of his sinister will. But it was not just their suffering that fueled the pulsating barrier that surrounded him. It was their despair, their anguish, their very essence, twisted and corrupted to serve his dark purpose. As Anne and Riley approached, their resolve steeled against the palpable darkness that emanated from Malachi like a suffocating shroud. He turned his gaze upon them, his eyes twin pools of endless night. With each step he took, the ground seemed to groan in protest, the very earth recoiling from the touch of his tainted presence. "Ah, Anne and Riley," Malachi crooned, his voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down their spines. "How delightful of you to join me in this little game of ours. But do you truly believe that you can stand against me, against the might of my power?" His words dripped with arrogance and malice, a twisted mockery of the humility that had long since abandoned his wretched soul. With a wave of his hand, the barrier surrounding him pulsed with renewed strength, a shimmering wall of energy that crackled and hissed with dark intent. "You see, my dear children," Malachi continued, his voice dripping with honeyed venom, "this barrier not only protects me from harm, but it also sustains me, feeds me with the very essence of those whose lives I have stolen. And as for your pitiful attempts to wield darker magic against me," he chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth or mirth, "you will find that such feeble tricks hold no sway over one such as I." As he spoke, Malachi drew closer, his form wreathed in shadows that seemed to dance and writhe with a life of their own. Anne and Riley stood their ground, their hearts pounding with fear and defiance in equal measure. But despite the terror that threatened to consume them, they knew that they could not falter, could not afford to show weakness in the face of such unfathomable evil. For as long as they drew breath, they would stand against Malachi, no matter the cost. Suddenly, from the depths of the relic, a figure emerged, a spectral apparition of the Crimson Blood Witch, her form twisted and contorted by centuries of torment. With hollow eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light, she loomed over Anne and Riley, her presence suffusing the air with an aura of malevolence. The Blood Witch's voice echoed through the arena, a haunting melody that sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. Her words were like whispers on the wind, carrying with them a sense of dread and sorrow. As the students watched in horror, the arena began to shift and twist, summoning forth a necromantic visage of their fallen friends. Zombie-like creatures, their eyes vacant and their movements jerky, emerged from the shadows, their twisted forms a grotesque mockery of the friends they once knew. With a sense of fear, Anne and Riley realized that they were being dragged towards the gaping maw of the Blood Witch, their every instinct screaming at them to flee. But before they could react, Lily leaped forward, her voice filled with desperation as she tried to save them from their fate. Yet, as the Blood Witch's essence enveloped her, Lily's form began to contort and shift, her features becoming twisted and grotesque. With a strangled cry, she fell to the ground, her eyes vacant and unseeing as the essence of the witch's life source consuming her from within. As silence descended upon the battlefield, Anne and Riley reached out to their friend, their voices filled with anguish as they called out to her. But Lily remained unresponsive, her gaze fixed on some distant horizon as the darkness closed in around them all. As Lily became more deeply ensnared by the darkness within the Crimson Witch's soul, her consciousness descended further into the depths of the past, a realm of shadows and echoes where the sins of generations past haunted the present. Her voice, now tinged with the eerie resonance of the witch, reverberated through the air, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and despair that threatened to engulf all who listened. "My name was Drusilla," the witch's voice echoed, her words carrying the weight of centuries-old sorrow. "Long ago, I walked this earth as a healer and a guardian of the natural world. But my powers drew the attention of those who sought to control me, to bend my will to their own. Malachy always gave me hope, protection, and unwavering love. Still, you try to threaten that. You try to steal it from me, try to steal him from me. You must die." As Anne, Riley, Ethan, and Nella listened in horror, Lily recounted the tale of the witch's past as she felt like she was trapped inside a locked room in someone's mind, her voice a haunting melody that seemed to linger in the air like a specter of bygone days. She spoke of her imprisonment, of the centuries spent trapped within her relic as Malachy's puppet, forced to carry out his bidding under the weight of a curse that consumed her very soul. With each word, Lily's own memories mingled with those of the witch, creating a tangled web of sorrow and regret that threatened to engulf her completely. Yet amidst the darkness, there was a glimmer of hope, a connection to her friends, and although she couldn't hear them, she knew they were there somehow. Anne and Riley exchanged a knowing glance, their own family history intertwined with the legacy of the Crimson Witch. They had long known of their ancestors' role in the events that had led to the witch's downfall, but now, faced with the reality of her presence, they felt the weight of their heritage pressing down upon them like a leaden cloak. Desperately, they tried to reach out to Lily to break through the witch's hold and bring their friend back from the brink of oblivion. But the darkness was relentless, its grip on Lily's soul unyielding as it sought to consume her from within. And as the witch's influence grew stronger, subtle whispers of malice and deceit began to seep into the fabric of reality, threatening to tear apart the fragile bonds that held them all together. With each passing moment, Anne, Riley, Ethan, and Nella found themselves locked in a battle not only for Lily's soul, but for their own survival in the face of an ancient evil that refused to be vanquished. Something struck inside the depths of the Blood Witch's mind, sending streams of memories through Lily's eyes as if it was a projector screen. In the dim, fog-laden streets of Victorian London, Drusilla's shop stood as a beacon of hope amidst the squalor and disease. The scent of dried herbs, fruits, and medicinal teas wafted through the air, drawing in weary souls seeking relief. It was here, in this humble apothecary, that the journey of the Crimson Witch began. Drusilla, a young woman with a natural affinity for healing, spent her days concocting remedies from the plants and powders that filled her shelves. Her reputation for crafting potent elixirs grew, and whispers of her talent spread throughout the city. One fateful evening, as the gas lamps cast long shadows across the cobblestones, a mysterious figure entered her shop. The man was tall, with an aura of ancient wisdom about him. His name was Alaric, an elder of Etheria, a hidden realm where magic thrived beyond the grasp of mortal understanding. Alaric had sensed a burgeoning power within Lily, a potential that could be harnessed and nurtured. Intrigued by her abilities and the compassion with which she wielded them, he revealed his true nature to her. Lily's initial skepticism gave way to awe as Alaric demonstrated his mastery of the arcane arts. Under his guidance, her understanding of the world deepened and her skills flourished. Their bond grew into a profound friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared vision of healing and protection. As the years passed, the winds of change brought darker times. Witch hunts began to ravage the lands, fueled by fear and ignorance. The once beloved healer became a target, her shop a place of suspicion. Alaric, foreseeing the peril, offered her safe passage to Etheria. With a heavy heart, Drusilla left behind the world she had known, stepping into a realm where magic was not only accepted, but celebrated. In Etheria, her transformation into the Crimson Witch took full bloom. She established a coven with two other formidable witches, Morana and Astara, each possessing unique strengths. Meanwhile, as Anne, Riley, and their fellow students battled against the Crimson Witch, the professors of the Academy banded together to confront Malachy, their faces set in grim determination as they faced down the ancient sorcerer who had once been their colleague and friend. With a surge of dark energy, Malachy unleashed his full power upon them, his eyes ablaze with a malevolent light as he sought to bend them to his will. But the professors were not so easily swayed, their own magic a formidable force to be reckoned with as they lit up the arena, pulling together their wands and power into a stream of relentless force. With each passing moment, the battle grew more intense, the air crackling with the raw power of their conflicting magics. The ground trembled beneath their feet as spells collided and energies clashed, sending shockwaves rippling through the very fabric of reality. But amidst the chaos, the professors stood firm, their resolve never wavering as they faced down their former colleague with a courage born of necessity. With each incantation, they channeled their magic into a devastating onslaught that threatened to overwhelm Malachy's defenses. Yet even as they fought, they knew that their enemy was cunning and ruthless, and that victory was going to be hard. With each passing moment, they felt the weight of their own mortality pressing down upon them, a reminder of the stakes at hand as they sought to rid the world of this evil. And as the battle raged on, they knew that they would need to summon forth every ounce of their strength and courage if they were to emerge victorious. For the fate of the world hung in the balance, and only through their combined efforts could they hope to overcome the ancient darkness that threatened to plunge them into an eternal abyss. As the chaos of battle raged on, Anne's attention was torn between the swirling magics of the battlefield and her concern for Riley. Suddenly, she noticed him crumple in on himself, his form collapsing to the ground in a heap. A wave of dread washed over her as she rushed to his side, her heart pounding with fear and uncertainty. Malachy, S laughter rang out, a cacophony of malice and triumph as he reveled in Riley's plight. Anne's breath caught in her throat as she knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch his motionless form. "Riley, come on," she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion, but she thought he was joking. But there was no response, no flicker of recognition in his eyes as she spoke his name. Frantically, "Riley, wake up! Come on, stop playing with me!" She shook him, her hands shaking with desperation as she tried to rouse him from his slumber. "Someone, help me!" she cried out, her voice tinged with panic as she looked down at his eyes, open and not blinking. She looked to her friends for their aid. Together, they tried everything they could think of, shaking him, shouting at him, even slapping his face. But still, Riley remained unresponsive, his body limp and lifeless in their arms. As the realization sank in that their efforts were in vain, Anne felt a wave of anguish wash over her, threatening to drown her in a sea of despair. Tears welled up in her eyes as she cradled Riley's still form, her heart breaking with the weight of the uncertainty that hung over them all. She rocks back and forth on herself while wailing. In that moment of despair, Anne clung to the hope that somehow, someway, they would find a way to bring Riley back from the brink. But as she looked into his vacant eyes, she knew that he wasn't there, that although his heart was still beating and she could feel it, Riley was not coming back to her. As the battlefield fell silent for a moment, Anne stood face to face with Malachi as she stood amongst the professors, the weight of her brother's memory heavy upon her heart. With a steely determination in her eyes, she knew that she was the only one who could put an end to him. "Malachi!" she called out, her voice ringing out with a strength born of defiance. "Your reign of terror ends here, for my brother's sake and for all those you have wronged." Malachi's eyes narrowed with malice as he regarded her, his lips curling into a cruel smile. "You don't deserve the right or the title of killing me," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are a little girl. You haven't even grown into your chest yet." In that moment, the professors pushed all their power harder, making him wince. Anne refused to be intimidated, her resolve unyielding as she squared her shoulders and raised her wand. With a whispered incantation, she summoned forth a torrent of magic, channeling the elements, cosmic forces, and even emotions themselves to aid her in that moment. As the two adversaries clashed, night sky pulsed, their spells colliding in a dazzling display of electricity and smoke. Anne fought with all her might, her every movement fueled by the memory of her brother and the desire to see justice served. But Malachi was a formidable opponent, his dark magic twisting and writhing in the air as he sought to overwhelm her with his power. With each blow, Anne felt the weight of his influence pressing down upon her, threatening to crush her spirit beneath its weight. Yet still, she fought on, her determination unwavering as she refused to back down in the face of adversity. With a final surge of magic, she unleashes the full force of her fury upon Malachi as she screams and cries out, her spell finding its mark with unerring accuracy. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of Anne's labored breathing as she waited for her own demise. And then, with a sudden rush of energy, Malachi was consumed by his own darkness, his form dissolving into a black hole as he was swallowed up by the void. As the dust settled around her, embers of the flames inside the wreckage from the battle lingering, Anne stood alone amidst the haunting silence, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifices that had been made. But as she looked around at her friends and comrades, she knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. She had lost so much, but gained even more. Knowing that she wasn't alone in this troubling time, although as she looked over to Riley's limp body, she knew deep down inside herself he was alive somewhere. As Ethan and Lily emerged from behind the remnants of Malachi's barrier, they found themselves bathed in the warm light of the new day, surrounded by the weary but victorious survivors of the long and harrowing battle. As they walked, side by side, they exchanged congratulatory nods and smiles with their fellow students and friends, their hearts filled with relief and gratitude for the hard-won victory. But amidst the celebrations, Nella's gaze remained fixated on Anne, who sat beside Riley's lifeless, comatose body. From her vantage point, she observed Anne's every movement, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity as she watched her friend's silent vigil. Anne's face was etched with sorrow as she sat beside Riley, her eyes never leaving his motionless form. With gentle hands, she brushed his hair away from his face, her touch tender and loving as she whispered words of encouragement into his ear. Nella felt a pang of sadness as she watched Anne, knowing that her friend was grappling with emotions too complex and profound for words. But amidst the sorrow, there was also a determination that burned brightly in Anne's eyes, refusing to be extinguished or threatened. As Ethan, Lily, and Nella gathered together to watch Anne by Riley's side, a somber silence fell over them, punctuated only by the distant sounds of celebration and relief from their fellow survivors. With heavy hearts, they began to converse, each sharing the weight of their losses and the scars left behind by the battle with Maliki. Lily spoke first, her voice trembling with grief as she recounted the loss of her beloved guardian beast in the midst of battle. "I lost my dear companion," she whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I will never forget the bond we shared, and I will never recover from his absence." Ethan nodded solemnly, his gaze fixed on Riley's motionless form as he spoke. "Seeing Riley like this, it changes everything," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of sorrow and regret. "I will carry this image with me forever, a reminder of the cost of our battle against the darkness." Nella's heart ached as she listened to her friend's words, the weight of their pain almost too much to bear. "Anne, seeing her like this, it hurts," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to do something, anything to help her, but I don't know what to do." Together, they stood in silent solidarity, their shared grief binding them together in the aftermath of the battle. And as they looked upon Anne and Riley, lost in their own private worlds of sorrow and despair, they knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. As Anne sat beside Riley's motionless form, her heart heavy with grief, she felt an overwhelming urge to sing, the same song their mother used to love, a haunting melody that had always brought comfort in times of sorrow. With a trembling voice, she began to sing, her words a bittersweet lament for all that had been lost. Ethan, Lily, and Nella knelt down beside her, their hearts breaking at the sight of their friend's anguish. "Anne, you must leave his side," Ethan pleaded, his voice choking with emotion. "We can't stay here any longer." But Anne refused to listen, her hands clutching Riley's lifeless form as she desperately searched for any sign of life. "I can hear his heartbeat," she insisted, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's still alive, I know it. I can't find him." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, her grief threatening to consume her completely. Ethan, Lily, and Nella exchanged pained glances, their hearts heavy with guilt for what they knew they must do. With gentle hands, they pulled Anne away from Riley's side, their own hearts breaking with each step they took away from him. Together, they guided her towards one of the many beasts still on the island, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the aftermath. As they walked, Anne's eyes filled with tears as she looked back at her brother, yet she noticed a little whip of energy and color glide upward from his heart. She's torn between the need to stay by his side and the knowledge that she had to move forward. And as they reached the waiting beast, she felt a sense of resignation wash over her, a silent acknowledgement that life must go on, even in the face of unspeakable loss. Meanwhile, as the final beast took to the sky, Shadowspear stood in the arena within the ruins. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked stone floor, painting the scene in hues of orange and gold. His gaze was fixed upon Riley's body, his hair caught by the wind, his cloak billowing behind him like a dark shroud. "Thatchet, I am so sorry. You deserve to be here more than me." Emotions churned within Shadowspear's chest as he watched the scene unfold before him. Guilt gnawed at his conscience, a heavy weight that pressed down upon him like a leaden cloak. He knew that he bore responsibility for the events that had transpired, for the darkness that had been unleashed upon the world. But amidst the guilt, there was also a flicker of something else, a glimmer of light, perhaps, that all was not lost. He had seen the strength and courage of the students, their determination to stand against the darkness no matter the cost. And though he knew that their journey would be long and fraught with peril, he could not help but feel a sense of pride in their resilience. As the wind whispered through the ruins, Shadowspear's thoughts turned to the future, to the battles yet to come, and the challenges they would face. He knew that he could not undo the mistakes of the past, but he could strive to make amends, to ensure that everything they held dear to them was protected at all costs. With a heavy heart, Shadowspear turned away from the scene before him, his mind filled with a sense of purpose and determination. He knew that there was still much work to be done, but he would face the challenges ahead with courage and resolve, knowing that he did so for the sake of all those who had been lost along the way. As Shadowspear stood in the fading light, lost in his thoughts, he felt a hand clasp his shoulder tightly. Turning around, he found himself face to face with Vivienne, her frail form swaying in the gentle breeze, her eyes haunted by the memories that plagued her. "Vivienne?" Shadowspear said softly, his voice tinged with concern as he took in her pallid complexion and tormented expression. "By the elders, you look horrific. Where the hell have you been?" Vivienne looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for answers. "I needed to see you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To talk. About everything. I couldn't face that battle after everything." They walked together along the shoreline of the island, the waves crashing against the rocks as they spoke of the past and the darkness that had touched them both. Vivienne told Shadowspear of her history with Malachy, of his obsession with her and the power he had wielded over her fragile heart. Shadowspear listened in silence, his heart heavy with regret for the pain she had endured. But amidst the sorrow, there was also a glimmer of something else, a shared understanding between two souls bound together by the trials of their past with the same person. As they walked, Shadowspear's keen eye caught sight of an old, beaten-up casket of wine, half buried in the sand. With a chuckle, he reached down and picked it up, his fingers wrapping around the neck of the bottle as he cracked it open with a strength born of years of battle. "Here," he said, offering the bottle to Vivienne with a wry smile, "a little something to take the edge off." Vivienne accepted the bottle with a grateful nod, her lips curving into a small smile despite the weight of their conversation. "You always did know how to make me laugh, even if you bend all my rules," she remarked, her voice tinged with affection. Shadowspear grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well, what can I say?" he replied, his tone teasing. "You always were a sucker for the bad boys of this world, but Malachy, that one still stings." Vivienne's eyes look upon the distant horizon with sorrow and guilt. "Who did we lose, may I ask? Did we lose many to him?" She cannot look him in the eye. He takes her chin into his hand and lifts her eyes to meet his, looking at her with honesty. "It was a battle, Vivienne. You will always lose more of yourself when you overthink those you lost." She slaps his shoulder and sighs. "You know I need to know. It is important that I know what I need to address when I return to the academy soon." Shadowspear takes in a deep breath and sighs out with a quiver to his voice. "In the chaos, we have lost many of the tamed beasts. which is a shame. They are such magnificent creatures. Of course you know who we lost at the start of this ordeal." Vivian looks deeply into his eyes, and not really wanting to know the truth, says, "Did Mrs. Perifold make it out?" Shadowspear couldn't contain his emotions at this point. His shoulders started to shake under his sadness, as the respect he held for that lady knew no bounds. That's the moment she knew she had left her own kin alone in the time they needed her most. "I'm such a coward. If only I had fought. If only I had done more." Vivian fought within herself. They would all still be here now. "You do not know that. You cannot predict what could have happened. You did what you had to. I don't judge that." He looks towards her, his eyes soft and kind, the first time she has ever seen that side of him. Shadowspear continued to tell her everything that happened from the battle, and with each hard blow, she felt waves of guilt settle upon her chest and in the pit of her stomach. Yet to just be sitting with someone who doesn't judge her made her feel secure and warm for the first time in many years. As Vivian finished the last of the wine, she leaned in to kiss Shadowspear's cheek, her touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary before she rose to her feet. Shadowspear watched her as she walked down towards the old wooden boat, her frail form silhouetted against the fading light of the setting sun. "Come with me," she called out to him, her voice soft and pleading. "Don't let me be alone." A wave of unsettling emotions washed over Shadowspear as he watched her go, feelings he had long buried resurfacing with a vengeance. He hesitated for a moment, torn between the desire to stay and the pull of the past that beckoned him onward. But in the end, he knew that he could not deny himself the chance to savor the last moments of the sun sinking below the horizon. "I'll catch up with you," he called out to Vivian, his voice tinged with regret. "Just need a moment to take it all in." Vivian nodded silently, her eyes brimming with unspoken words as she climbed into the boat and pushed off from the shore. Shadowspear watched her go, a sense of longing stirring within him as he remained behind on the island, alone with his thoughts and the fading light of day. As the boat disappeared into the distance, Shadowspear felt a pang of sadness in his heart, knowing that he had let her slip through his fingers once again. But amidst the sorrow, there was also a glimmer of hope, a sense of renewal and possibility that whispered of new beginnings on the horizon. As Shadowspear stood on the shoreline, lost in his thoughts, he suddenly felt a presence beside him, a warmth enveloping him like a comforting embrace. Startled, he turned around to find himself face to face with Riley, his spirit glowing softly in the fading light. "Riley? Are you real?" Shadowspear breathed, his voice tinged with awe and disbelief. He waves a hand in front of him, then moves to embrace him, but his arms passed right through Riley's incorporeal form, and Shadowspear stumbled forward, landing face first in the sand with a comical thud. Riley chuckled softly, his voice echoing in the quiet of the evening. "Easy there, old friend," he said, his tone gentle and reassuring. "I'm not quite solid at the moment." Shadowspear scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Riley's ethereal form seemed to shimmer in the dying light, his features bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow. "I'm in the Hall of Mirrors. Do you know what that means?" he explained, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I don't know how to get out. I just want to come home." Shadowspear's heart ached at the thought of Riley trapped in such a place, unable to move forward or find peace. "I'll find a way to bring you back," he vowed, his voice filled with determination. But Riley shook his head, a weary smile playing on his lips. "That would be nice," he said, his words heavy with resignation. "What if there's no way?" Shadowspear felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to Riley's words, the weight of their parting settling heavily upon him. "No, that's not the way this ends for you," he says, his voice choked with emotion. Riley's form seemed to shimmer in the fading light, his features fading into the ether. "Please be quick," he said, his voice fading into the distance. "I don't know how long I have here." And with that, Riley was gone, leaving Shadowspear alone on the shoreline, his heart heavy with sorrow, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. As he watched the last rays of sunlight fade into the horizon, Shadowspear felt a sense of happiness wash over him, a resolve to carry on the fight in honor of those who had fallen, and all to get Riley back to Anne. If he could just do that, then all of this was enough. And so another adventure begins. "I'm far too old for this," he whispered to the wind, his voice tinged with a slight laugh. And with that, he turned and walked away, snapping his fingers as he was enveloped by his cloak, leaving an eerie stillness on the shore with only the rocking of the shipwreck on the wind.